Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica and this is Rick's Reads. I know we're already in 2025, but today I wanted to do a reading wrap up for 2024 because I haven't done that yet and it's still January. So I'm going to be talking about what I read in 2024, what my top favorite books of 2024 were, my least favorite books of 2024. I'm going to be using some images that I'm pulling from Storygraph. I actually heard about Storygraph from another booktuber on here, Read with Reese. She was pulling up her Storygraph for one of her monthly wrap-ups, and I just thought it was really cool how it shows the different moods, the different genres, the different pacing of the different books that you've read. And I'm actually a consultant in my 9 to 5, my day job, so data visualization makes me happy. So when I saw all those graphs and charts, I was really excited about that. So I imported all my Goodreads data. It was super easy. There was a tiny little glitch in it, and I checked the export, which was accurate, but for some reason it double counted a few of the books. So some of these percentages might be slightly off, but it gives you an idea about what I've read. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to be, once we kind of do the summaries from Storygraph, I am going to go into hopefully a really brief summary of the books that I read. And one way that I'm going to be categorizing the books that I read in 2024, especially some of my favorite books, is categorizing them as type 1 or type 2. I'm using this based on a concept of type 1 and type 2 fun. I haven't seen this done for books before, but I felt that it translated really well. If you're not familiar with the concept of type 1 and type 2 fun, basically it's very popular. Actually, a couple years ago, I was out in Colorado. That's where I first heard of these terms. It's very popular in places where there's a lot of outdoor sports and things like that, because that's where type 2 fun is, I think, more common. So type 1 fun is the type of fun that everyone thinks about. That is, you're having a great time, you're laughing with friends, you're playing a game, something like that. Type 2 fun is where there's a difference, and that is maybe you are going skiing and you're really cold, but at the end of the day, you're like, that was really awesome. I had a good time. Or you're going rock climbing and you're terrified, and there's a moment where you're on the hill and you're like, this is awful. Why did I do this? Why did I sign up for it? And then you get that adrenaline rush at the end of it and you're like, that was sick. I'm so glad that I did that. So type 2 fun is something where you may not be having fun in the moment, but after it's over, you consider it a very fun experience and it's meaningful to you in some way. So that's how I'm going to describe some of my favorite books here. Type 1 will be books that it was a really fun time. The whole journey, I had a really exciting and fun reading experience. And then type 2 books, I will be categorizing books that maybe it was a little bit tougher to get through, but now I reflect back on them a lot and I'm really glad that I read them because maybe I got a lot out of the book. Not every book is going to fit nicely into either type 1 or type 2. Actually, my favorite books are typically books that are both type 1 and type 2. So that's a little disclaimer about kind of how I'm going to be going through some of these. But I guess I'll just jump into it with my Storygraph. So I'm gonna pull some of the images up as I go with some of these graphs, hopefully so that you have a visual to go along with this. But first of all, I read 47 books in 2024. I feel like that's a really good number for me. I was reflecting on this as I set my 2025 reading goal, and personally, I don't think that I could really read many more books than that while still giving myself time and space to process the books that I'm reading. Even at 47-ish books, there were times when I felt like I was finishing a book and then jumping right to the next one without giving myself time to process. And so I think that that's probably a good place for me. I know that there are other booktubers who are reading over 100 books per year, and I think that's awesome. And sometimes I find myself wanting to do that because I'm like, I would speed through my TBR if I could up it to 120 books per year. But honestly, I don't think that I could process all of that, plus have a life, plus have my day job. So I think this is a really good number for me. And then the top moods that I had were number 1 was emotional. And then reflective, adventurous, sad, dark, tense, mysterious, challenging, inspiring, funny, lighthearted, hopeful, and informative. So I think that probably tracks. A lot of the books that I like are emotional and reflective. And then I'm curious what the funny book that I read was. Black Friend Essays by Z-Way, and then Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which was my only DNF of the year, actually. I got over 400 pages in Infinite Jest, and I had to return it to the library, and I said, maybe another time I will get through the other 600 pages. Pace, I had most of my books were medium paced at 81%, and then 11% were slow paced, 9% fast paced. So that's me, right in the middle, medium. Page numbers, I had 23% at less than 300 pages, 46% between 300 and 500 pages, and then 32% at over 500 pages. So those are probably all my fantasy books. And then fiction and nonfiction, 79% of my books read were fiction, and then 21% were nonfiction. That's not really surprising to me. I do really like nonfiction, but I love fiction. A lot of my news that I consume, I get through podcasts or newsletters or something else. And so that's how I'm consuming kind of nonfiction content. So a lot of times I want to check out in my reading experience with books and jump into some fiction. So I think I might see nonfiction increase the percentage a little bit in 2025, but I think fiction will always be the majority of the books that I read. Genres, number 1 genre was fantasy. I really tried to make it through all 16 Sarah J. Maas books in 2024 because I wanted to be caught up with the rest of the Maas universe and be able to consume some of the content where people talk about spoilers, and I do not like spoilers. So I have been not consuming any content until I finish all the books. But fantasy books in general for me are definitely type 1 books. So I read those because they're fun, not because I feel like I am going to have some sort of transformative experience from them. And I think I was pushing myself to read too many of those and they stopped being fun for me. So I had to take a little bit of a break. And I have 2 more that I didn't finish. Actually, I just finished one. So I've got 1 more Sarah J. Maas book that I need to finish before I've completed them all. But that's probably a big part of why fantasy was my top genre in 2024. Next is literary, then romance, then contemporary, historical, memoir, LGBTQIA+, classics, thriller, history, speculative fiction, magical realism, and then biography, essays, horror, music, mystery, politics, psychology, short stories, travel, young adult, art, dystopian, and race. So lots of genres there, but not super surprised by that. Format is not accurate, so I'm going to skip over that. Most of the books that I read are probably on my Kindle, but this is saying that most of them were print. I think I just probably didn't click the right thing in Goodreads while I was reading, so we'll ignore that. And then my most read authors, again, I just said I was trying to get through all her books, so this is not a surprise, but the top one was Sarah J. Maas with 14. And then Haruki Murakami, Sally Rooney, Rebecca Yarros, R.F. Kuang, David Foster Wallace, Anne Buress, Taylor Jenkins Reid, Jeanette McCurdy, Colleen Hoover. This feels wrong to me, but this might be because some of them were double counted. Languages, this is wrong. It says that I read books in English, Italian, and Finnish, and I cannot speak Italian or Finnish, so something was wrong with the export there too. Number of books, it looks like this is just fun for me. It's probably boring for you, but another aspect of Storygraph that I like is it shows how much you've read across the year, month by month. So it shows when you had a good reading month or a slow reading month. So it looks like my top months, like I had a little lag in February, which is not surprising. I got married in February. And then it had another lag in June, and I'm not sure what was going on in my life there. But it looks like I only read one book. So I was probably just living my life. And then star ratings. So this is where I'm actually going to go into the books that I read. So I'm going to click into each of these so you can see which books I gave each of the star ratings. I am pretty thoughtful about the books that I do read. My TBR is very long. It is currently sitting at 160 something, so I always have a lot of books that I want to read, and I watch a decent amount of booktube to get recommendations from creators that I trust. I also follow a bunch of my friends who have sometimes similar taste on Goodreads, so I'm not often reading a book that is completely unvetted, and maybe I'll do more of that at some point, but and try to be a little bit more adventurous. But I feel like with a finite amount of books I can read in a year, I like to read books that I have a feeling are going to be pretty good. So I don't really read bad books. So you'll see that there's one with no rating. That's Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I said this was my only DNF of the year. I got to over 400 pages, and some of it was fun to read, but then I had to return it to the library and decided that I had other stuff that I wanted to read instead of continuing on with that over 1,000-page book, plus the footnotes. The footnotes is why it takes so long, because you're like flipping back and forth. There are like 85 footnotes on every page. I also have heard other people talk about how they feel conflicted about reading David Foster Wallace's books because he was not a great person. A lot of people don't talk about why he wasn't a great person. I looked it up. It does look like he was abusive to his partner, so doesn't seem like a really great guy. He has passed away, so I think like I believe, died of suicide, and so I think that his, especially Infinite Jest, is still like an important literary milestone. So that's why I wanted to read it. But yeah, he does not seem like a great guy overall, and wouldn't recommend supporting him as an individual based on what I read about him. But it does seem like this is kind of like an important book to kind of understand modern day fiction, which is why I wanted to read it. But I'll have to wait for another year because I didn't make it through. And that one would be probably type 2, where I would be like, oh, that was a lot, but happy I read it, but I didn't get there. But there were some type 1 moments in it. My 2-star books, I have the Jessed Heir, the Scorched Throne series, the first book in that. This is unfortunate. There were so many aspects of this book that I typically would like, and so I really thought that I would like this book, but I actually had to pause reading it because I got bored during it, and fantasy is always type 1 fun for me, so if I'm not enjoying myself in fantasy, then it's not doing what I want it to do. I don't read fantasy for like personal growth or anything. I read it just for escapism and enjoyment. And so this, because I found myself having a hard time getting through it, was not good, but it had so many things that I liked in it. So I'm confused at why it didn't click for me, because it had so much that was good about it, but I was bored reading it. So I don't know. It ends with us. I've mentioned this before. I don't really like Colleen Hoover books. I've tried Layla, It Ends With Us, Verity, Remembering You or You Remember, something like that. I tried a couple of her books and they're just not really for me. It Ends With Us. I had a hard time getting through it. I didn't like the writing. I didn't like the story. I didn't really like the characters. And then I liked what she was trying to do at the end, which kind of saved it a little bit, but I didn't like the book. It would have been a 1 star. This was one that I actually really didn't like. I say I don't read bad books, but because she's so popular, I was like, I must like her books, but I didn't. So now I don't read her anymore because I tried enough times. Moving on to 3-star books. I think more of my books should probably be 3-star. I've been a little bit overly generous with my books in the past, so most of my books are in 4 and 5-star, but they should probably have more in the 3-star category. But I have, it looks like 6 books in there now. The first book on here is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the father of magical realism. I liked a lot of parts of this book. I thought it was really beautifully written and type 1 in that way because it was fun to read, fun characters. Perhaps some of the pieces of this story just didn't age well, which I had a hard time with. I mentioned in another one of my videos that I recently read Lolita, and I think that what is redeemable about that story is that they're talking about a inappropriate relationship with a child and an adult, but it's through the lens of the adult is like a bad person and this isn't a good thing and here's why. There was a portion of this book where the main character is in a relationship with a teenager and it's just like, yeah, that's cool. Like, it's just like, so didn't love that. So I think there were just some parts like that that didn't age well for me, which brought it down a little bit, but it is a beautifully written book. And I would like to read more Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've heard wonderful things about 100 Years of Solitude, so I think I will probably give that book a try at some point soon. Tower of Dawn, this is Sarah J. Maas book, type 1 fun, but it wasn't that fun for me. It's one of the more boring books in Throne of Glass series, so I gave it a 3-star. The Girl on the Train, this was type 1 fun all the way. This was a thriller and it was fast and I think I read it in like a day or two. And fun to read, and this is where this is I think the start of me being a little bit more judicious with my 4 and 5-star ratings, and I held myself back and I was like, yeah, this was fun, but it was just fun for me, so I gave it a 3-star. But it was really fun, and everyone knows about this book. I think it's a movie now, so I'm not sharing anything that you don't know. Les Parisiennes, How the Women of Paris Lived, Loved, and Died Under Nazi Occupation by Anne Seba. This book was fully type 2 fun for me. So I really enjoyed the stories in this book. It's covering, obviously, women in Paris during Nazi occupation in World War II. And there's some really incredible stories in here. I think the challenging thing for me was that it follows the story of about 40 different women, and it's really hard to follow all of them all at once. I think it would have been easier if it focused on fewer, and so it was hard to get through just because there were so many different stories that you were following. So it was challenging to read, but I really like it in hindsight. So this is fully one that I would say I would put in the type 2 category for me, but really glad that I read it, but it was a little bit tough to get through. Crown of Midnight, this was another one of the more boring ones from the Throne of Glass series. I've mentioned this before, but the first 2 books in that series take place in a castle and they don't leave, and that is tough for me. So I was a little bit bored. If I rated this a 3, then I should rate Jessed Air a 3. I think they're comparable, where it's a fantasy book that I should be having more fun with, and I'm a little bit bored. So those should probably rank about the same. Then Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, written by Anderson Cooper. This is fun because Anderson Cooper is Vanderbilt. His mom was the last Vanderbilt to live in the Breakers, the Vanderbilt mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. So he's writing this story from the perspective of this is my family's history, which I thought was cool. I actually read this around the same time that I was watching The Gilded Age on HBO, which was interesting because there were some scenes in that show that are taken they are almost identical to scenes in this book. They don't have a Vanderbilt family in that show because they couldn't use the actual name, but there are families that are partially based off of them. And so he goes from around the time of, the mid 1800s all the way through and kind of living through the Gilded Age of New York through the mid 1900s and Truman Capote and a different society in New York. And so I thought it was really fun to see, to read this book from his perspective, but there wasn't a ton that I didn't already know. So I didn't feel like I learned any extra new things about the family or anything, but it was a fun book and it was fun to read from the perspective of this is him telling a story about his family. Okay, now we are going to 4-star was my most popular star ranking, so I was just throwing out 4 stars to anyone. Lolita, I gave 4 stars to, and I mentioned this, I think, on my November wrap-up video after I finished this one, that I thought that this story was really beautifully written. Because of that, there were aspects of type 1 fun during it because the writing was fun to read, but there were also times when it was hard for me to push through because I didn't enjoy reading about the subject matter very much, and so that was hard for me. So I would say this is more of a type 2 book for me, but there were moments of type 1 fun just because of the writing style. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is a very popular celebrity memoir, and I think for good reason. I think it's a really interesting story about dysfunctional and codependent parent-child relationships and how challenging those can be to deal with. I thought this was a really great story, and I thought it was really brave of Jeanette McCurdy to write this story, and it was very much type 1 fun reading material, so it was easy to get through, easy to read, and I thought it was a really great celebrity memoir. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. I really liked this book. I read it late in 2024, so I just finished it a couple of weeks ago, and this book was type 1 and type 2 fun for me, I think. I actually feel like there are aspects of this book that remind me of Piranesi, just because of some aspects of the main character's point of view. But it's also, so it was fun to read, type 1 fun, but also there's a type 2 aspect of it where I'm reflecting on it, and I actually don't know what having read it, I don't know what this book was about. I had a fun time reading it, and I liked it, and it was very creative, but I think I need to spend more time thinking about this or in a book club about this book, because I don't know what this book was about. So this is where I'm like 47 books a year is my max, because I cannot possibly fully give all the time to the books that I read that is necessary. This one I think I need more time to process, which is why it's a type 2 book as well. But I thought this was a really interesting, creative, and different book. Empire of Storms, Throne of Glass. This one was fun, type 1 fun. Yellowface, R.F. Kuang. This one was type 1 and type 2 fun for me, I would say. It was a really fast read, but I feel like I've referenced it a decent amount after reading it or thought about it. A Court of Wings and Ruin, type 1 fun. Lolita is on there a second time. The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. So this is interesting. I guess this is technically a horror, and I didn't know that I liked horrors, but this one was really fun to read. So I would say this is for sure type 1 fun, possibly type 2 fun, but very much type 1 if you want something kind of fast-paced, easy to read. I would say The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. This is making me feel like I can read more horror, so I might do that in 2025. Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. I thought this book was really well written. I think Ezra Klein is a very thoughtful and intelligent person, and I liked a lot of his takes in this book. I read it in 2024. It was published in 2020, and I feel like it was very 2020 coded for me, so it felt a little bit like going back to 2020, which was a stressful time. And so I think it would have hit a little different if I had read it back when it was published in 2020, but I still thought that there were some really interesting takes in this, and I thought it was a really good book. House of Sky and Breath. This is another Sarah J. Maas from the Crescent City series. This was type 1 fun for me. The Glass Castle. This is a memoir about a child growing up in somewhat of a dysfunctional family and overcoming obstacles, kind of like growing up in a challenging environment. It reminds me, I also recently read Demon Copperhead, one of my favorite books that I read when I was 12-ish. Was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Kind of similar vibes to both of those books. I thought this was a really great memoir, very emotional. Another one that probably I read and wanted to sit with for a little bit, because it's emotionally heavy, but a really good book. So type 1 and 2 fun, I would say. The Assassin's Blade, Sarah J. Maas, Throne of Glass, type 1 fun. Divine Rivals. I think that this, in hindsight, I rated a little bit too high. I really like the concept of the world building in this fantasy world. We didn't get to explore too much of it in the first book, so I think I want to read the second book just to see where it goes from there. But I do feel like the interpersonal relationships, the romance in the book was a little bit rushed and lazily done. So I do think that it was rated a little bit too high, but I still want to read the next book to see where it goes, because I'm interested in the concept and the world that this fantasy book is set in. A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is the novella in one of Sarah J. Maas's series. I don't think it was 4-star. Honestly, it's kind of boring. It should probably be rated lower. But it's not bad. It's just a little novella that doesn't have much in it. Mr. Salary, Sally Rooney, also a novella. This is only 33 pages. And I love everything Sally Rooney writes. So if she wrote a 1-page poem, I would probably give it 4 or 5 stars. So yeah, this was fun for me, even though it was just a tiny little novella. I would read a whole book about these characters. What I talk about when I talk about running, I talked about this on my November reading wrap-up video, but this was really fun for me to read. I actually listened to it while I was running. This one was fun for me because I have done some distance running, so I think if you've done distance running, it can be fun. It is also just about life and kind of applying lessons from running to other aspects of life. So you don't have to run to like it, but I thought it was both type 1 and type 2 fun for me, because it's well written, easy to consume, and there were nuggets out of it that I find myself thinking about after being done with the book. Queen of Shadows. This is Throne of Glass, book 4 by Sarah J. Maas, type 1 fun. Heir of Fire, another Sarah J. Maas, type 1 fun, enjoyable, escapism, what fantasy should be. And this is where I started liking the Throne of Glass series. It got past book 2, and then I was like, okay, things are getting good here. Just Kids, Patti Smith. I talked about this in my November reading wrap up as well. This was more type 2 fun for me, but I also type 1 fun because it is a really well written book or memoir by Patti Smith. So because her writing style is really beautiful, it was kind of type 1, but I would say a little bit more type 2 for me. A Court of Silver Flames, I gave 4 stars, I guess. This was type 1 fun. This is fun. I like Sarah J Maas, but if you like one of her books, you probably like them all. They're like, I don't want to say they're all the same. They're different, but they're all type 1 fun. Kind of like cotton candy read. They just like make you feel good, whatever. Down the Drain by Julia Fox, another great celebrity memoir that I read. Really wild. Jeanette McCurdy and Julia Fox. Not every celebrity should write a celebrity memoir. We don't need one from everyone, but these two I felt were really good. Tokyo, Like a Local. I read a Tokyo reading or Tokyo guide. I probably shouldn't have put this on here, but I read the book before my trip to Tokyo, so it was a really well done travel guide. So 4 stars. Now we are up to my 5-star books, and I think I've said this before, but I was a little bit too generous with my 5 stars. So some of these, if I had to re-rate them, I don't know that I would give them 5 stars. Would give them 5 stars, but let's see. So the first one was The Postcard by Anne Berest. This is about a woman who receives a postcard with the names of her family members who died in the Holocaust, and she's wondering where it was sent from. And the book is about talking to her family and finding about her family who was in Nazi-occupied Germany during World War II, and trying to figure out this mystery about who she got the postcard from. I thought this book was really fun. It was type 1 and type 2 fun for me, so I really liked this one. Maybe I would give it more of like a 4.5 or something star, because I've read better books maybe, and so just wanting to save that 5-star category for really special ones. But this one was really fun, and I still think that it was a great book. Wayward by Amelia Hart. This one was really fun. It was about witches and about 3 women who live in different time periods in history who are all related. And I talked about this a little bit on my last video. It was type 1 and type 2 fun. I think it was the author's first novel, so I do think that there were some signs of that in the writing, so maybe I would lower my rating a bit, just because, and I can't write at all, so this is me who can't write judging someone who wrote a great book. But I do think that there were some things that could have been improved upon a little bit with just a little bit, I don't know, more experience as a writer, but I still thought it was a great book. So this one I might drop down to like a 4, but I still thought it was type 1 and type 2 fun. Babel by R.F. Kuang. This one was really good. I love everything that R.F. Kuang writes that I have read so far. Definitely type 1 and 2 fun. I do think that I just personally sometimes like when an author lets the reader make some more connections for themselves, and R.F. Kuang I think can be a little bit heavy-handed in like, this is the takeaway from my book, but I thought it was such a cool creative book. I really liked it. So yeah, type 1 and type 2 fun. 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, really fun for me. It's type 1 fun, probably more just type 1 fun. Just like a silly little fiction. I had a phase where I really liked looking into everything about Marilyn Monroe, and while this is a fictional character, there were some parallels with old Hollywood that I found to be fun to read about. So I liked this one. Would it still be a 5-star? Maybe 4, but it was really fun for me to read. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Everyone's probably read this book and knows it, but it's type 1 and type 2 fun. This one is really good, still a 5-star. This one I can pretty confidently say it would still be a 5-star for me. I think about this a bit. I loved Greek mythology when I was younger. I also took Latin all through high school, so a lot of the mythology stuff I have always found interesting, and I thought this was a really fun retelling and so emotional, and I love when a book makes me cry when I'm in the mood for it. And this one was type 1, type 2. Really good. Still 5 stars. Black Friend Essays by Z-Way I read this and thought I need to write more essay novels because I think I like essay novels, but I also like everything that Z-Way does. So this was so type 1 fun. I didn't want to be done with this book because every morning when I would pick it up and get to read, I would laugh out loud sometimes in the book, but then also have a lot to think about. I loved this collection of essays. So type 1 and type 2 maybe. I would still say this is 5 stars. Intermezzo, Sally Rooney. I did a whole video on this, but this is a little bit more type 2 fun, I would say, but I think Sally Rooney's writing is fun to read, although she was a bit more experimental in this book. So, and it was longer, I think, than a lot of her other books. So it's a little bit slow paced and it's a little bit long. So I think it's a little bit less type 1 fun than maybe some of her other books, but I would say type 2 fun for sure. And I love Sally Rooney, so 5 stars for her. Tomorrow. I really like this book. I know this is a super popular book as well. I read this book at the very beginning of 2024, so it's been a while since I read this, so it's not as fresh in my brain anymore. I did think that this was type 1 and type 2 fun. I don't actually know that I know a lot of people give it 5 stars. I never played video games growing up, so I think video games is a really big part of this, and that didn't connect for me. So I think just on a personal level, I don't know that I got as much out of it as other people would have. And so for me, maybe just the personal enjoyment, I may have slid down a little bit and rated it a 4-star. I think it still probably is a 5-star book, but I think I had less type 1 fun with it because I couldn't connect to the whole video game thing because I've never really played video games. Fourth Wing. This is so type 1. And again, this book is so popular that I'm not sharing any new information, but this is the definition of type 1 fun for me. I could not put this down. I was on a vacation with my husband. We were supposed to go out for a nice dinner, and I was reading my book, and I was like, hold on, I have to finish this chapter. It's that kind of book that you do not want to put down, and you lose sleep over, and it's so engrossing and so fun. And yeah, some people say it's not that well written, or they will pick it apart. Whatever. It is so type 1 fun that worth it. Yes, not type 2. I really, except for the fact that so many people have read it that it's fun to bond over it with other people who have read it. But this is like the definition of type 1 fun for books. Demon and Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I just finished this a couple weeks ago. This was an incredible book. I would say type 1 and type 2 fun. I really thought it was well written, so it was over 600 pages, but it was easy to read, and I am thinking about it. I'm talking to other people about it in my life. It touches on like the opioid crisis in America, which I think is very interesting. It's like a horrible thing that happened, and I think I'm interested in consuming content about it. This touches on it a little bit, so there are a lot of things that I liked about this book that made it both type 1 and type 2 fun, and I would still say 5 stars. Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. I loved this book. This one was so type 1 fun for me. This was another one that I just got excited to read every time I picked it up, and I think I actually liked this more than Intermezzo. I read them both this year, and I'm giving them both 5 stars. Beautiful World, Where Are You was a perfect place for me to soak in existential dread with these characters. Which, like, maybe I didn't need to do that, but I enjoyed doing it. So, yeah, I gave it 5 stars, and I thought it was type 1, type 2 fun for me. If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, I gave 5 stars. This is still definitely 5 stars. This is another book that I remember reading and thinking that I needed time to process what I had just read because I had so many emotions, so many thoughts. And then I was like, well, I guess I'll start reading my next book. And it felt wrong to just jump into a new book after reading this one because there's just so much to digest and process once you finish this. It's just like, so I really enjoyed reading this. This was type 1, type 2 fun for me. But I would say more so type 2 just because of the stuff that it's talking about really makes you think afterward. And this was my first James Baldwin that I'd read, and I definitely want to read a lot more by him because this was just like, whoa, like really incredible, like perfection in writing. Yeah, just really good. Piranesi or Piranesi, I don't know. This is the only book of 2024 that I added to my favorites shelf. So this is a new favorite, which is rare for me, and it's type 1, type 2 so much. From the moment I picked up this book, I was like the style of writing, the main character, I was like, what is happening here? This is so weird. And then it's type 2 because I still think about this book a lot. And this was an absolute favorite of the year, and it is on my favorite shelf now. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Holy moly, I loved this book. It's just, sometimes you read a book and it's just, you read a lot of books and it's like, okay, I'm reading the same thing. Like I read all my fantasy books and I'm like, they're all just different shades of the same thing. But this is different and fun, and wow, I loved it. The next one is Sarah J. Maas, Crescent City #1. It's type 1 fun. I don't think I would give it 5 stars again. I would probably give it 4 stars. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I liked the world building. I have now finished the 3rd book in this series as of like a couple days ago, and it starts getting a little bit messier later on, but I liked where she was going with book 1, and I had fun reading it, but I don't think I would give it a 5 star again. Iron Flame, the 2nd book in the Empyrean after Fourth Wing. Again, so fun. I know a lot of people thought it was really sloppy, and a lot of people are like, AI wrote it, but whatever. I had a lot of fun reading it. Felt similarly engrossed as I was in the first one. It's why I like fantasy. It just, again, pure type 1 fun where you just want to be completely engrossed in a fantasy world. These books are just so fun. That's it. That's all my books. Is that all my books? This is a long video, so I'm sorry, and if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I will try to make some shorter videos in the future. I guess this whole, summarizing a year of reading, it was hard for me to do in a short amount of time, but I hope this was fun. I hope this, gives you all a better idea of what types of books I read. It's kind of all over the map, but maybe I'll do another short video at some point with where I think I'm gonna go in 2025 with my reading, how I think it's gonna be different. But I hinted at some of that in this video. But this is what I've read, and I think 2024 was a good reading year for me, and I'm excited to have another good year in 2025. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.